I'm joined today by Greta Christina, who's a blogger and author of several books about atheism, including Why Are You Atheists So Angry? 99 Things That Piss Off the Godless. It's so great to talk to you. I mean, you have an incredible past. In addition to being an atheist, you consider yourself a feminist. You're a former porn actress. There's just so much to talk about. Let's dig into it with sort of what may be the simplest question, I hope anyway. How long have you considered yourself an atheist?
I've been calling myself an atheist since about 2005, but I've been calling myself an agnostic, or agnostic, skeptic, other words for non-believer, for many years before that.
Okay.
And then I
When
had
I
several
this is
years where, yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, no, go
when
ahead.
I talk to David Silverman from American Atheists, he tells me that I am an atheist, although I believe that I am agnostic. In other words, I am very much open to the idea that there is some higher power, a God, whatever you want to call it. I just have not seen any evidence of that right now, but I consider myself open to that idea, and thus I think I'm an agnostic. But explain to me what was involved in your transition from agnostic to atheist.
Well, the most important thing I want to say to that is I don't care what you call yourself. I actually think it's really important that non-believers be able to self-identify with their non-belief using any language they want. I started calling myself an atheist when I started reading other self-identified atheists talk about what it meant to them. And I'd always thought that atheism meant 100% absolute certainty that there was no God. And then I started reading atheists say, no, it doesn't mean that. We're not 100% certain about much of anything in the world. It just means being certain enough. And, it means I don't have any reason to think there is a God. I haven't seen any good evidence there's a God. And until I see some better evidence, I'm going to conclude that there are no gods. And when I started reading that, it was like, oh, I don't have 100% knowledge that there are no unicorns, but I wouldn't call myself agnostic about unicorns. And that's how I feel about gods. And that's when I started calling myself an atheist. But really, I'm not going to tell you stop calling yourself an agnostic. Different people define these terms differently and for different reasons. And so if you feel like agnostic is a better word for you, I would ask you to consider, whether that really is the most accurate word, but ultimately it's up to you to decide.
Okay, let's talk about anger. And I've seen, of course, you have the book. I've seen speeches and talks you've given about this anger that sometimes is sort of associated with atheism by some. Anger has been used to deflate numerous movements over time as a sort of, hey, listen, this is not a valid movement because look at how angry they are. Currently, it's a term that's being used to disparage both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump for drastically different reasons in the presidential campaign. Talk a little bit about that. Do you believe that there is a sort of anger associated with atheism for you specifically? I wouldn't want you to speak for everybody. And where does this idea come from in your mind?
Well, I think that it's important to remember that literally every social change movement in history, certainly all the ones I'm aware of, the moment that they start to get some sort of real power and some real visibility, they start being tagged as angry.
Mm.
And, it's like, the angry blacks in the civil rights movement, the angry feminists in the feminist movement, the angry gay people in the LGBT movement. Every time a social change movement starts to get some real traction, we start getting pegged as angry. And I think it's important to remember, first of all, not all atheists are angry about religion, but those of us who are angry about religion have good reason to be. There's real harm done by religion. There's harm done to atheists, and there's harm done to believers by religion. And anger is a source of power. Anger motivates us to do something when something is wrong. Anger is often what signals us that something's wrong in the first place. And so when people say, oh, you're so angry, so we're going to dismiss what you're saying, it's a sign that we're actually are being effective. And it's not really engaging with what we're saying. It's not a response to the content of what we're saying. It's just dismissing us because we've begun to take hold of our power.
When you talk about, as you mentioned, the ways in which religion can be damaging, has been damaging to both believers and non-believers, I'd love to sort of dig in a little bit to the specifics of what elements of religion, if any, you are okay with. And by that, I mean this. If people are religious in the sense that they believe in Jesus or they believe in Muhammad or whatever, but they don't proselytize, they don't use their religious beliefs to try to tell others how to live their lives or suggest that government be run by their particular set of religious beliefs, does that bother you in the same way that somebody could believe, oh, I don't know, maybe the entire universe is a simulation, right? I mean, whatever one's beliefs are, if they're not using them in the ways I just mentioned, does that bother you?
Well, it certainly doesn't bother me as much. And if all religion were like that, if people believed in the supernatural, but they never used it to hurt other people, they never used it as an excuse to kick their kids out of the house, they never used it as an excuse to traumatize their children, to oppress people, and so on, I would certainly be less angry about it. I probably wouldn't make it the cornerstone of my, writing career. But I think it's also important to remember that people use religion to hurt themselves as well. People use religion to justify really bad choices in their lives.
Explain
And
that. What do you mean by that?
well, if you believe, for instance, I'll talk about my own beliefs. I used to
Yeah.
believe I had all kinds of new age beliefs. I believed in reincarnation, particularly. And as a result, I made some bad choices in my life because I thought, you know what? This life isn't the only one I have. I can, if I miss some opportunity, I'll have that opportunity again in the next life. I used to believe in tarot cards, and I made some really bad decisions about like my romantic life and so on, based on tarot cards. When we believe in when we believe in the supernatural, when we believe in anything that isn't true, we're likely to make bad decisions based on it. It's the more true things we believe, the better choices we're going to make about our lives because we understand reality and cause and effect better. So I certainly wouldn't be as angry if the only people that people were hurting with religion were themselves, but it would still upset me.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of your other beliefs and sort of sets of ideas that are associated with you. You've performed in pornography. You consider yourself an ardent feminist. Some say that the objectification and subjugation of women in porn is inherently anti-feminist, right? But I've interviewed some porn actresses, like, for example, Nika Noel, who say feminism and pornography are actually quite compatible. Talk to me about how you square the two. What is the relationship in your mind between ardent feminism and pornography?
Sure. Well, first I want to make very clear, when you say I was a porn actress, I performed in one video years ago.
Yeah,
I did some modeling for still photos, and that's not like it's not like I'm embarrassed about it. It's just I don't want people to go, "Oh, what, Greta Christina was some famous porn actress," and
right.
no, I wasn't. It was something I did a little bit many years ago.
Note that I use the
But
term porn actress, not porn star.
mhm. Thank you. That's true. Yeah, I was not a star. I did this, a little bit many years ago.
Yeah.
But I absolutely think that performing in pornography, modeling for it, producing it, writing it, whatever, can be feminist. Because for me, feminism is about ownership of our own bodies. Feminism means my body, my right to decide. And that has to do with, birth control, abortion, reproductive rights. But it also has to do with what I do with my body sexually. And, certainly the way that pornography often plays out in our culture is very sexist. I'm not going to deny that. But almost every form of pop culture is sexist. We live in a sexist culture. Television is sexist, movies, video games, advertisements, pop music. So I don't see any reason to single porn out as being a special case, as opposed to just it's another form of popular culture where there's a lot of freedom for personal expression for women, and where also there's, of course, room for exploitation and sexism because, what do you know, that's the world we live in.
I'd love to get your thoughts on what is an incredibly controversial issue surrounding feminism over the last probably 8 to 10 years, which is that there is a contingent that claims to be against only the most recent form of what they describe as sort of militant feminism, third wave feminism, call it whatever you want. I think you and I both sort of know the idea that I'm referring to here. The people who say they are equity feminists, but against the recent, I guess what we'll just call for the time being, extreme feminism. They say that extreme feminism actually hurts women, however it is that they sort of define that. Do you think that this is a legitimate concern with the sort of modern contemporary feminist movement, or do you think that it is mostly an excuse to actually further sexism and misogyny?
Well, first, I think extreme feminism is not a great term for that because you can always marginalize the ideas of in a group by saying they're extreme. It's like saying, "Oh, they're so angry." It's the same kind of thing.
What
You
should
know,
we call it?
actually, I think third wave feminism is a perfectly
Okay.
good term for it. It's the view that that what's important in, I mean, this is a large complicated topic, obviously, but the idea that it isn't just enough to get laws passed making sure that we get equal pay for equal work and so on, that there are deep rooted, largely unconscious, although sometimes conscious, attitudes about gender, very rigid gender roles that women, men, people who don't identify as either women or men, people who don't identify on a gender binary, are pressured into literally from birth. There's a huge amount of research backing this. It shouldn't be controversial.
Hmm.
And that in order to have an equal society, we need to do more than just pass laws saying that uh, that you have to be paid the same and be given the same job opportunities and so on. That for an equal society, we need to really dig into our attitudes about gender and sexuality and gender roles and so on, and work to unlearn them. I mean, certainly that's hard work to do, but it's the only thing that's going to happen. That's the only way that real equality is going to happen.
So
And
I guess
I don't think that's an extreme view. I think that's it's actually pretty uncontroversial. If you look at sociological, psychological studies, it's very well founded and has been for decades.
so how would you characterize this sort of recent trend of appearing to be critical only of third wave feminism? What's your sense of that movement?
My sense of that movement is that, at best, the most charitable possible thinking view of them is that they haven't thought very carefully or looked very carefully at what third wave feminism really is. The least charitable characterization is that they don't want to acknowledge the realities of sexism and misogyny because it means giving up a lot of goodies, giving up a lot of advantages, and it means doing a lot of really hard work of unlearning learning to recognize and unlearn our own unconscious sexism. And you said it's like they're saying, oh, they're these extremists, and therefore we can ignore the whole thing. You can say that about any group. There are people with bad ideas in any group, in any social change movement. There's always a handful of people with bad ideas. I don't think the problem is just necessarily that they're extreme. It's just that sometimes they have bad ideas. But the majority of the feminist movement now is very astute, very conscious, very tuned into good research, good sociological, psychological research, very thoughtful. And interestingly and importantly, the majority of feminism right now is very conscious of how sexism doesn't just hurt women, how sexism also hurts men. It also hurts people who don't identify in a gender binary. It really does. It hurts women more than men, but it really does hurt everybody. And we really do want a better world for everybody.
Well, we're definitely going to want to have you back and talk more about that, a fascinating topic. We've been speaking with
Sure.
Greta Christina, blogger, author of several books. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Can I plug my book real quick
Please.
here? Here's the cover. Here's the cover of the book we were just talking about. It's called Why Are You Atheists So Angry? 99 Things That Piss Off the Godless. And thanks so much. This was a great conversation.